podcast. Today's guest is author and editor Scot Noel. Scot Noel was published in Hubbard Presents Writers of the Future, Volume 6 in 1990, which helped launch a very successful career as a writer and in starting his own science fiction and fantasy magazine, DreamForge. This is his story. He also reveals what he is looking for from authors wanting to be published. Welcome, Scot.
Hi, thank you, John. Thank you for having me back. It's exciting to be here.
Absolutely. We last spoke a couple of years ago. And so now that we've grown quite a bit, I'm looking forward to sharing the great news of your magazine. Now, you're in the 5th year now?
This is our 5th year. Yes, we're just entering it.
Which is amazing. So that's great. I remember your first year in the first issue at Writers of the Future workshop. We got copies of that first issue that we, either the first or second issue that we passed out to all the winners. It was very exciting, the start of a new science fiction magazine. And so I'm anxious to talk about that. And the importance of what you do with DreamForge cannot be overstated because you're that special and now very rare component in the publishing world as a science fiction magazine. So let's dig right in.
Okay.
So first,
would you like me to tell the folks what DreamForge is all about?
Absolutely.
All right. Sorry to interrupt you, John. But the idea for DreamForge came to us in like 2018 or so. My wife is very involved in this. She's our layout artist and line artist and does a lot of that work. But we were basically getting dissatisfied with what we were reading in science fiction and fantasy in terms of everything trending toward the dark and the apocalyptic and dystopian. And that's not the science fiction necessarily that we grew up with. I myself am a big Star Trek fan, and we wanted to do something that basically said, you know, hey, there is a hopeful future. Humans are great problem solvers, and you know, we can basically get around all of the challenges that are before us. You know, I myself believe that the future has always been the better place to be. I certainly wouldn't want to have lived even in the 40s and 50s. I certainly wouldn't want to have lived 200 years ago. Even a generation past. I'm in my mid 60s, and you know, by this age, if I were in any other age, I would, you know, be blind, crippled, and I mean that literally because I essentially have artificial lenses in my eyes. You know, I've had damage to my knee that, you know, wouldn't have been able to be repaired, you know, in previous generations. The future is always a better place to be, and not just medically. You know, even when we talk about things like climate change, we're in an age where people say, oh my God, you know, the world's going to end because of this and nobody's paying attention. And I would disagree. It's people are paying attention, and that in itself is amazing. This is the first age in which people have actually even understood that or paid any attention to it. So you can always, like, the glass is half empty, half full. You can look at the situation and try to see, you know, which direction it's going. But as far as DreamForge goes, that's what we try to do. We try to look for those stories that basically aren't utopian. They don't say, oh, everything's fine or everything's inevitably going to be fine. But they look at the world and they basically say, okay, well, who are the people who are going to solve the problems? What's the perspective that we can take to look at history and all of this? And like a tagline that we often use for our stories is that in all worlds and times, our tales revolve around those individuals and groups who bring meaning and value to the world, whose actions are of consequence and whose dreams are the vanguard of things to come. And that's basically DreamForge.
Which is amazing. And I really appreciate this a lot too, because that's not dissimilar to what we do with Writers and Illustrators of the Future. Mr. Hubbard, when he created the contest, had viewed science fiction as that herald of possibility. So while we're not necessarily saying, you know, like you said, everything's utopian, the ultimate solution to any problem is the human spirit. You know, we're the ones that are going to go through in that tenacity to life, which is going to make us overcome any obstacle and grant us that ability to be able to do that. It's really easy to have the naysayers, and the cup is always half empty. And you're right. You know, you have those people. That's not our book, and it's obviously not your magazine.
Well, and the other thing, and we've talked about this, but one of the tensions that I've always been fascinated with by humanity, not just by science fiction, is just the idea that you know, are we just a species that's just a natural species like all other ones, that we're no more freer to change ourselves or our situation than like a bison or a blue whale? Or, you know, are we some special species, you know, an ascendant species that can have the entire universe as its playground? And that's part of the tension of DreamForge too. So, and that's one of the reasons why we don't look at things as just completely dystopian, because yeah, we're a very rowdy species, John. It's like we have violent tendencies, you know, We, have hatreds, both interpersonal and interracial, and all that stuff, and we have wars. But we're always also taking a step beyond that, and part of us is learning how the universe works, and part of us is learning how to take care of other people, and part of us is cooperative. And so we're always just of the opinion that the better angels are always going to be, if they don't win out completely, they're always going to be a bit further ahead than the destructive nature that we have.
Absolutely. There was a story that you wrote. We'll be talking about this too, but in Worlds of Light and Darkness, which is the Best of DreamForge Space Time Volume 1. And I read several stories in it, but one I really liked is in the foreword written by yourself, your opening paragraph. Like all human endeavors, writing can be turned to harmful purposes. Storytelling becomes propaganda. Narratives are crafted to divide us, to sow fear and distrust for the benefit of those who would reap the power in their lives. Yet, in essence, writing and oral lore, its ancient precursor, have always been an act of hope. And I really like that. I hadn't really looked at it like that, but it was just so like black and white. Reading that opening, your opening line, it was like, wow, I really loved that article. But it's so true. You see it happening. You see it even the more so with the social media, the divisiveness of words, storytelling. People make up stuff, and you can't tell what's truth versus not. But one man's truth might be somebody else's lies too. So that's also part of of that challenge.
Well, social media, a lot of the things that we go through today, those are brand new tools for us. It's like, as a species, we don't necessarily know how to deal with that or know where that's going to evolve. And I think when we started, it was very naively thought that it was going to just, open up freedom of expression for everyone, and the entire world was going to be able to talk about ideas, and ideas would have equal footing, and the best ideas would win out. And obviously that's not quite the internet that we know. We know an internet of very cacophonous voices that just, want to fight with one another and put each other down and troll one another and all this sort of thing. That's not the entirety of the internet, though. You can certainly look at that if you want to, but I belong to any number of Facebook groups and that sort of thing where that's not the message at all. And people are cooperating with one another, especially like our writers groups, helping one another write, helping when we work with our first line readers from around the world, helping find good stories to put in the magazine. The cooperation and the goodwill is certainly there. But like anything else, the bully voices or the nasty voices can certainly get the attention and can certainly make it look like that's all there is.
Sure. Well, in the old days, you used to have the stockades, and you had the women and men that went around spreading rumors and false tales would end up in the stockades. You see them, and they'd be out in the open for ridicule, and that was that. That was the handle. You don't have that anymore. That's
why the future is a better place to be. Because now you can just go online and you can say whatever it is that you want, and no matter how ridiculous or silly it is, you'll get some attention, and nobody essentially puts you in jail for it. So when they talk about all this censorship online, it's like I'm not sure exactly what they're talking about, because there's an awful lot of different opinions all over the place there, and some of them are pretty nutty, and some of them are certainly you don't have to look far either to find very wise and reasoned people who are giving balanced information. It's just we like listening to our own voices. We like getting validated. We actually enjoy being in those echo chambers where people are agreeing with us, because we all want to think we're smart. We all want to think we know the answers, and the internet is basically just a playground where you can find everyone who agrees with you. You can get in your little huddle, and sometimes that's a little destructive. But like I said, it's a brand new tool. We don't know exactly what it's going to look like or how people are going to evolve to use it in 50 years, 100 years, 200 years. It wasn't even around, when I was a young man and was learning my trade and doing stuff. It's so brand new that we really don't have a handle.
For sure. But it's interesting that the value of science fiction and fantasy itself as a genre, even though what gets told and what's allowed and what's current in the way how it's actually the storytelling that's acceptable, or as it is accepted in the complexity of it, still has a purpose, I think, at least, that is either for the dystopian stuff, here's a warning, or somehow or another some type of satirical bent on it to poke fun at, what's happening or the trend that's going to get people to say, hey, whoa, whoa, whoa. How do you see that?
Well, all those voices are tremendously useful. So I would never say, hey, our stories are the only type of stories to be told. I love horror stories, but DreamForge doesn't publish horror stories, that kind of thing. So when you're talking about, dystopian warnings, and you're talking about satire and all those things, those voices in the mix are extremely valuable. The idea is that anything where you're writing fiction, you're really engaged in an initial act of hope, because you're not writing to say, hey, we're all doomed and we're all going to die tomorrow, and just give up hope. No matter what you're writing about, even if you're making fun of your government or if you're making fun of corporations or whatever, you're basically doing it as an act of hope that you can make some change, that there will be some incremental movement toward the better in whatever that situation is. We're simply basically stressing the idea that those changes will happen, not that they're impossible. We're stressing the idea that there are people who are working toward those changes and will succeed in some elements of those changes. So definitely all those different voices are extremely valuable and useful. It's the competition of ideas. It's the playground where people are out there trying to get their message across.
Right. So now I want to back up a bit now. So how has your timeline evolved from becoming a writer to editor, or from coming out of your mother's womb to becoming a writer to editor?
Well, I never planned on being an editor is one good place to start. I loved writing, but I didn't particularly plan on becoming a writer. Actually, I was thinking today, I was in a networking group of businesses today, and that was actually one of their questions. It was basically, how did you get into your profession? What kind of drove you forward? And the actual story I can remember is from grade school. We were being taught by a teacher, grade school teacher. I was actually a nun. I went to Catholic school, who was trying to ground us in the idea of saying, hey, you shouldn't pay attention to those silly science fiction stories that you see on TV and in the movies and stuff. And they were giving us she was giving us the idea that if you were to have a computer that could actually work like that you see on the movies, or a robot that you could see on TV, like to be as smart as a human, that computer would have to be as big as the whole planet Earth. And, think how silly that is. And that's not what I thought at all. My initial childish brain basically said, so you're saying if we built a computer as big as the planet, it could be as smart as a person. And I said to myself, that's only an engineering problem. That's not some fundamental thing that says this can't be done. That's just engineering. And that's exactly what happened, as I grew up and in my life, because when I was that age, computers that don't do what my cell phone will do took up huge amounts of space in like a warehouse, and they had to be refrigerated, and every step along the way, as I grew up to high school and college and that sort of thing, they got smaller. And by college, it was a computer lab, and then basically they were selling computers to people. I remember getting my Commodore 64 and saying, this is absolutely silly. I don't know why they decided to sell these to people, but what are people ever going to do with these? But as long as they were silly enough to make one, I'm going to buy one. so that I have this. I may never have this chance again. And but we obviously went from the Commodore 64 to business computers, and I saw them come into the businesses where I worked. And I just fell in love with the idea of progress and technology and how the world was changing. Just seeing things like I went to school and actually learned a slide rule. And that was at the time when calculators were coming in. And naturally, we were told that calculators, you weren't allowed to use those because that's just crazy. And you need to learn how to use your slide rule and do this stuff in your head. And you're never going to have this tool when you're actually doing something. And for me, again, it was that same reaction that I had in grade school. It's like, that's silly. Why are you even saying that? Of course we're going to be using these devices.
Yeah, those Texas Instrument calculators were so cool. Yeah, anybody that had Texas was like cool.
It's just going to be like a couple of years, and these are going to be the standard thing that you use. So I always saw that, and I was very, very interested in that. So that was part of my career in just learning to love the computer. While everybody else at any place that I worked was terribly afraid of them, I loved them, and I wanted to know how they worked and learn the networking aspect of it, learn how to do things, learn stuff, word processing, all that kind of thing. And then just kind of tangential to that was how I got involved with Writers of the Future. went and bought a copy of Battlefield Earth at some point as a young man, and I absolutely loved that book. But I remember it was very early in the contest, because this contest has been around for quite a while, and there was a card in there that said "Submit to Writers of the Future." So I did that. Obviously, didn't get in on my first try, but by volume 6, I was in second place there, and that was a transformative thing, because it's like, oh, maybe I can do some writing here, and this is pretty cool. Well, one of the things that happened that combined the idea of the computers with the idea of writing was that when I was at that particular point, there was a computer game company that was starting up in my area. And you guys are so good at the publicity, that letting people know in the area, hey, this person won this international contest and is a writer and all that, that the computer gaming company called me up and said, hey, you write, we need a writer. And I said, at that time, they couldn't offer me what I was making, but I would have jumped for computer stuff at any point. It's like, can you let me sleep on your couch and give me hot dogs? I don't know. I'll come. Spaghetti. We'll have spaghetti once in a while. I'll come and work for you, and we'll just figure it out. And that turned into a decade-long career, because I went from basically writing novellas and short stories and things in the game character interaction text, to basically voice director, to associate producer, eventually to project manager in charge of multi-million-dollar games that we were putting out at that point. And by that point, I could eat. But and that also, that same company, which at the time was called Event Horizon and eventually became called DreamForge. Guess where the name of the magazine came from? My wife was working there as well. So we've been working together for every day for like 30 years. We just a little while later just decided to get married, and we still work together every day, and we've been doing that forever. But so that's how essentially the love of computers and the idea of the future and how we were evolving intersected with writing, intersected with getting a job with computer games, and then eventually, as my wife and I founded our own business, which is based in web development. That's actually what I do today. Am I still a writer? Yes, I'm a content developer. I don't write a lot of fiction, but I write for companies all over the country as far as their particular content and blogs and that sort of thing, which is also a great way to learn stuff. It is an amazing way to learn about how things are changing around the world and in different industries. But there was a point in 2018 or so, because we've had the company for a long time. We've got a young partner who's starting to take over responsibilities. We've got staff. We said, we actually don't have to work 15 hours a day, so let's find a way to do that again. So I came up with this idea. Well, it'd be kind of cool to write, to get a magazine together, and we've both been talking about how things are so dystopian looking. Let's do something that's a little different than that. And that's where DreamForge comes from. So I really didn't have a plan to become an editor. It was like basically that year. It was like 2018, and it's like, yeah, I think I can do this. Let's do this. But that's the same attitude that I think both of us have had, and is a good attitude, is you just see kind of an opportunity and let's try to do it. The worst thing that can happen is you fall on your tushy and learn what your capabilities are, what you can and can't do. So we started DreamForge. I remember getting some of the first stories that we had submitted that I would look at them and I would say, these are really good. I want to publish these. And my wife, Jane, said, you still don't know what you're doing. You don't know if that's any good or not. And I would say, I said, yeah, this is good, and because some of our first submissions were really that good, and it threw us off a little bit, because you hear about the slush pile and how awful most things are, and I didn't turn out that way, and I still don't think it's that way. I think a lot of people write a lot of good stuff. Obviously, we can't publish it all, and some people, do need some help and some guidance, and you've gotten into that. But and I'm sure you guys see that with Writers of the Future, just by the length of the lists of your honorable mentions and silver honorable mentions and stuff. It's like there's a lot of good stuff in there. You're just trying to filter it down and that sort of thing.
And that's like the top 10%. What you see as honorable mentions.
Yeah. And as far as publishing, we end up, the numbers are just the numbers. It's like we can buy about 2%, and what always try to tell people, one of the things we try to do is give people a realistic understanding of how publishing works, at least from our perspective, because we were never in it before. We had to learn everything.
Mm-hmm.
But we can publish about 2%. And that's because that's what the budget allows. And when we're doing that, we're not saying, oh, these are the best 2% of everything that came in. There could be a really terrific story, but if it's a horror story, it's like, I'm going to say, well, this isn't right for DreamForge.
Yeah, it's not your market.
Or I could have 5 out of, let's say last time we did submissions, we got like 650 submissions. Let's say 5 of those were really terrific Mars stories. Well, unless it's my intention to do a Mars themed thing, which it wasn't, I can't buy 5 Mars themed stories. I might even look at it and say, but I had a pretty good Mars story in the last issue and I don't really want to have another one. So there go 5 stories that were perfectly good, perfectly publishable, and they're going back to the author. We're not, and we don't call it rejection, we call it returns, because we're just returning your story. I can't use this right now. And and then there are those that do have some issues. They need to learn some things about the structure of storytelling, and it doesn't mean that they're untalented. It doesn't mean that they're bad or they've crafted a terrible product. It just means, like anything else, they just need some instruction to get past some rough points in what they do. We can't offer that to everybody, but what we came up with in DreamForge was to create a Patreon support group that we call Dreamcasters, and that's where people who are really interested in learning some crafting stuff come to our Zoom meetings, and we try to bring on guests, and we try to do writing challenges, and we try to help them advance in their ability to write, which was also a new thing. That wasn't something we had as an intention when we started DreamForge. We just wanted to make the magazine, and then over time, as you're working through all these hundreds and hundreds and thousands of stories, you kind of get drilled into your head. It's like, I know what's wrong. It's like these ones that we really can't accept because they're not quite at the mark. We've seen this 1,000 times. We know exactly what's wrong with these stories. It's either too much exposition, or they've started the story in the wrong place, or they don't know how to do dialogue or whatever. They're very common things. So one of our next evolutions was just to try to get into helping people. And when we did it formally, rather than the idea of just trying to give people notes for each story, one, that's an amazing amount of time. I'm sure from reading and editing. If you have like 650 stories like we did last time, and you spend like 5 minutes on each one, that's like 80 hours work.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously on some we spend more than 5 minutes, and on so you have to basically get some kind of method down to it. But what we found was the idea that if writers in general, not saying they're very nice people and they have very good intentions, but 90% of them, when they send you a story, if you send them a comment back, what they're looking for is validation. They're not really looking to learn to write, which is fine. I mean, there's nothing evil or bad in that intention, but they're really looking for someone to tell them they did a good job. So if without asking them, and we learned this the hard way, without asking them, if you just start sending them back information, it's like, here's what you did wrong. Don't do this. Lots of times that's very disappointing, and it's like, that's how we get cursed by voodoo people. That's a story in itself, but we did actually get a voodoo curse once for sending a story back.
Congratulations.
I thought it was great, but people just get upset, or they say, well, you don't understand what I'm doing, or you don't see where I'm going with this, or whatever, but they basically throw it back on you. So we not everyone, but we learned essentially not to give unsolicited feedback. And what we've done sometimes is we've basically said to some people, it's like, if you'd like to hear some comments on this, what we think, let me know, and I'll put the time in to do it. But I'm not just going to send you just random feedback, because you may not want to hear what it is we have to say. You may just want to hear how good you are, and that's not always the case right now, but you could be better. So that's why we ended up coming up with the idea of the Dreamcasters, and people who are really serious about hearing what their problems might be, and how to improve what they're doing.
Yeah, I was a guest in Dreamcasters earlier this month.
Yeah, we appreciated having you.
Yeah, it was fun talking to those people. Lots of questions, definitely a lot of. They're very high interest group you've got there.
Yes, and we've done some really cool things. We've if anybody listening is familiar with the Great British Baking Show, we did a contest last year that was styled very much along those lines. And what I mean by that is, if you've ever watched that show, it's such a sweet show. It's basically everybody gets into the contest, and you have to basically say, okay, well, now this person's going home, and these people are moving on to the next phase and that sort of thing. And it's always done very sweetly. It's never like, oh, they did such a terrible job. The person who's going home usually gets hugs. They get handshakes from the people who are doing the show and hugs from their other contestants. And we wanted basically a feeling like that. So we went through it without getting to that point of saying, well, you're out of here because you screwed up. It was more like, and there was a lot of people who just kind of self-edited themselves out. We had people, as they went along, they got to a certain stage in producing their story, and they basically said, no, I'm not quite up with everybody else. I'm just bowing out here. But it was really cool, and they did end up producing some publishable stories out of that. They, like, when we were done with the contest, they took them back, they did some final massages on them and submitted them, and we actually picked up some of those for DreamForge. And it's very, very heartening as an editor when you go through things like that, because I know one guy, for instance, when I saw his first work come in, his first submission come in, and he really was serious. He wanted to basically say, tell me what I'm doing wrong. And it's kind of that moment of tension where you have to say, well, really what you submitted was pretty much word salad. I mean, it's like there's almost nothing here to salvage, and here's what that means. And because his intention was, I seriously want to get published. So it was like that moment where you have a sit down and talk with someone. It's like, okay, well, if you're telling me that you're really serious and you want to engage in this, you're nowhere near where we need to be. And he was serious, and he basically said, okay, well, tell me what's wrong. And we went through that, and he joined Dreamcasters, and amazing turnaround in terms of, I would never have expected it, from word salad to publishable story in like 6 months.
Wow.
And and very, very good story. And that story is actually, I'm not gonna call him out, but
good. Well,
but it's in DreamForge. So read DreamForge stories. One of those stories is from somebody who I didn't have hope for when I originally saw what they were doing. So
went from salad chef to main chef. Okay, good.
From salad chef to main chef, he did.
That's great. Well, that's interesting also about that we got on Dreamcasters, because also when we created the online writing workshop, that's where you see so many honorable mentions now. We went from having a certain number to it popped up to like 10%. Just the quality of storytelling increased so much more, because there we had the individual lessons taught by Orson Scott Card, Dave Farland, and Tim Powers, and all the essays by Oren Hubbard and Aldous Budrus. And it just makes a real difference when you get some. It's one thing to be able to go and just, I have a storytelling, you start writing your words, your salad, start making your salad. And it's a first course, and that's fine, but it's not something that's going to satiate any real hunger. But then getting these tools of how do you start a story? How do you write the middle? How do you create suspense? How do you handle narration? How do you end a story? Those are all important parts, to be able to do a story. So that's why that I think the Rise of the Future has been such a major influence in the industry. Now, I've noticed too, there's a lot of Rise of the Future folks in either in your
yes.
Dreamcasters or in your publications. What's your take
Yes.
on Rise of the Future and the value of that towards the science fiction in general, science fiction and fantasy?
Well, let's talk about that just real quick.
Yeah.
We'll start at the idea that there are writers of the future people in DreamForge and stuff. I just looked brief before we started this at a couple, but we've had Writers of the Future winners and finalists that have contributed to DreamForge, including M.T. Wrighton, Billy Marilanen, I probably murdered that name, Terry Madden, Mike Jack Stumbos, Liz Coulter, Lee Melling, Marie Croak, Donald S. Crankshaw, Gary Kloster, Kurt Pankow, Flores M. Klein, and Wolf Moon especially. I'm sure we have others. Those are the ones I could find at a glance. But obviously, what you guys are doing, and Writers of the Future, when those stories come to us, you can see that thing you're talking about. You can see that idea that they have some idea how these stories are structured. They have some idea how to polish them. They have some idea how to make them come alive for the reader. So, that's great. And then the other thing that I see that is heartening as well is that as we try to do our little part with teaching with our people, I see their names coming up in your silver mentions and silver honorable mention and honorable mention, and we talk about talk about that as well as they start to improve their things. But I think one of the ways that I see writers of the future is a little bit like the Olympics. It's that place where people, come to compete and prove that they're the best. And, my first place, my second place, and my third place. And, did I get in there? Did I get any kind of honorable mention? So, a lot of writers see that as the place to go and kind of prove themselves. So it's not just that you're looking for the best in writers of the future, but by being there, you're basically creating a drive to be the best and a drive to be better than the best that was before, sort of thing.
Yeah.
So, I would hesitate to, say that if I took my winning story from 1990 and submitted, as a brand new writer and I submitted it today, who knows if it would even get an honorable mention, because that bar has kept being raised, over the decades, and that's going to, be a ripple that moves out across the field, in all the genres and subgenres, because those people that are essentially being trained by trying to compete in your arena, and that you're trying to, bring them up as better writers, you're going to see that effect go out, across the both science fiction and fantasy fields.
Yeah. It's also interesting too how the genre has evolved and changed. Like, usually you see with writers of the future, maybe 5 to 10 years in advance, you'll see that the head of any curve in science fiction. Like when steampunk became the rage, you'd see steampunk stories maybe 5 years before you start seeing it in bookstores. And so, which kind of makes sense too, because the writers who win are the next, they're the writers of the future. They're the ones you can be reading down the road. So like Scot Noel, so but it's true though, because these are the new voices. And so we had Pat Rothfuss, and Brandon Sanderson. Epic fantasy had done really well with Lord of the Rings, but there wasn't a whole lot there for a while. I mean, you had Eddings, which I loved reading his works, but then there wasn't a whole lot. It didn't become the big thing. And then you started seeing more of that as these people got through recognition. And you've got Rune Lords with Dave Farland, and I said with he was a winner in Volume 3, but then you had some of these other winners that have gone on, or maybe they just got honorable mentions, as in the case of Brandon. So it's something that
your most successful honorable mention ever, I imagine.
Yeah, and Joe Hill was an honorable mention. He's done pretty good. Stephen King's son. So I see people and talk to them and say, "Have you heard of Rise of?" Oh yeah, I got an honorable mention from you. Said, "Wow, that's cool." There's just been so many people over the years. I mean, we're in year 40 now, so 4 decades of writers of the future. So now going back then to DreamForge, how do writers submit to you? You said you get hundreds of entries, but what's the actual process, and what do you prefer? Because some people will just send something to you and not necessarily follow the guidelines, and the penalties for not following guidelines.
Well, the penalties for not following guidelines are basically that you signal to the editor real fast that you don't really care what they're looking for, or you're just not even playing the game. It's just you found a place that was open and you just decided to send this file. But how do you submit? Well, first of all, we only accept submissions for certain periods during the year. They're not set periods where I can tell you, well, every May we do this, but because Jane and I have, we work full-time jobs besides this, so our schedules can be unique, and we have to try to set aside time to do things. But we will announce, and we announce this on the usual places that writers usually know, like Raylan and Duotrope. We also have a page on DreamForge that you can follow. So you go to dreamforgemagazine.com/call-4-submissions. So call-4-submissions after dreamforgemagazine.com, and we'll always post there what's going on. And it'll say the portal is open or the portal is closed, or we're going to open the portal on a certain date. Next submission period will probably be sometime in spring of the year. But when that comes open, we have essentially an online portal that is our own. We don't use Submission Grinder or whatever. There are a lot of other ones out there. and you basically just need your file. You need your Word doc file or your RTF file, and you need to upload that into the portal and tell us who you are. It gives you the opportunity to write a little cover letter and submit that. And what that does then is that gives me the opportunity to basically have that available in our cloud-based system for all of our first-line readers who are literally around the world. I have people who work for me work with me from Canada, England, Australia, New Zealand, Germany, depending on who's available during that time. And it gives us a lot of ability then to read those stories and to comment on them and see other people's comments and try to get a feel for what stories we think are actually the ones we want to possibly publish here in the coming period. But so it's basically a portal submission process. We're looking for anything ranging from poetry of like a very short poem to flash fiction, to the maximum that we want right now is 5,000 words. So we cap it at 5,000 words. And obviously we're looking for hopeful themes. So writers who are familiar with the idea of solar punk or hope punk, or simply a good story that has a positive ending. Those are the kind of things that we're looking for. And we go from there, and then we basically just try to go through that as quickly as possible. Although for us that can be 6 to 8 weeks, and get back to everyone and pick the ones that we're able to buy. Our big thing this year in our 5th year, and we basically want to increase our revenue to the point where we can pay 8 cents a word. We're paying 7 cents a word right now. Our big goal for year 5 is to get that up to the professional rate, beginning professional rate of 8 cents a word. So anybody who buys a subscription, anybody who helps us out with, we have a Kickstarter this year, or any of the other buy merch on our website, get a t-shirt, anything you do, really, you're helping us achieve that goal, because we really are in it for the writers and the illustrators, and we want those creative people to basically be rewarded at a level that at least means something. We're not handing them a banana and a free copy.
That's good of you.
Not to say that really small presses are bad for doing that. Don't, that sort of thing. You have to start somewhere.
Sure.
Everybody has to start somewhere. But our goal has been to continually improve the ability of what we can pay our creative people.
Good. Now, you've got 2 incarnations of your stories. You got your magazine, and then you've got the best of DreamForge. So how does that work? What qualifies for best of? Is this based upon your take, or is it upon like what used to be in the old magazines, where the fans would write and say they'd vote for the top stories of that issue, and you take the fan verdict to determine who the best stories are?
That's a very good question, and I would say we have more than 2 incarnations. So let's back up just a second and talk about incarnations. So we have a couple of things that we do. We have an online readers portal, which is a place where you can go to read the stories. Most of what we do, we put up there for free. Mm-hmm. We also have digital copies of DreamForge. Now, the online digital copies, the difference they have from print is that we not only have stories, but we also have articles. So we will have articles. One kind of article I call Hope Notes, where we just talk about things. Like people may or may not have heard that the Great Barrier Reef had a really good year this last year. It had amazing recovery, that sort of thing. So we will have articles that talk about this idea of, look, things can move in the right direction. Sometimes there are good things happening. We have articles, since we have become so focused on helping writers, articles on writing. I will write articles on writing, but we also have our resident writer, Wolf Moon, who's a Writers of the Future winner and very successful at being a writing coach and helping other writers along. And he contributes an article every time from his Super Secret series. And we publish those articles. We also have online line edits. We usually, every issue, we can find someone who will say, yeah, it's okay if you show what the first draft was to the end draft and how we got there and what all the line edits were. That's fine. I'd love people to be able to see how that happened. So for paying subscribers, we have some of those features. So we call that DreamForge Anvil, and that's actually quarterly. And So we do that once a quarter to get those out. And then what happens is we will take the first 2 issues of the year, so the first 2 quarters of the year, first half of the year, and we will combine those into a print magazine, the stories anyway. A lot of the other features we can't all put, in the print, but we combine that into a print issue, which, as you can see, we try to have very nice covers. Here's the issue before that. They're full color, they're illustrated. We have very nice illustrated interiors. So that comes out twice a year. And then this one that you've been talking about, Worlds of Light and Darkness, is an anthology that we actually did with Uproar Books and in cooperation with Space and Time magazine. And the best of DreamForge there, to get to your question, those DreamForge stories were my picks. They're the ones that I love, not, So hopefully hopefully everyone else did too. But I'm still just being editor there and saying this is what I think some of our best stories are. And actually, I would have called it, these are some of my favorite stories. But the label best of was more a publisher decision than an editor decision. So we're just trying to all of these venues to try to build a community, I think, would be the best way to say it.
Right.
We're not so much trying to build a publishing empire of things as build a community that basically, just much like Writers of the Future is doing, you're trying to bring along these writers and improve the quality of the product in the field. And we're trying to build a community of people who say, I know how to write hopeful stories. And I know how to write good stories, and I also know how to be an advocate for the idea that we're, not all going to die in a nuclear holocaust.
That's good to know. Yeah, I think that's one thing that's important that writers need to know is markets, understanding what market means. Like DreamForge is a market, Writers of the Future is a market, and just because you're not accepted doesn't mean you didn't write a good story. It's just that it's not your market. Can you explain that a little bit more? It's like maybe we're doing the hammer and anvil where we're just beating up, but people still don't understand that. So just really, when you get something back, it doesn't mean that your writing wasn't good. Because I know writers, until they've gotten over whatever hump, will immediately introvert. I'm not good enough. I'm going to quit. I can't do this. But that's not what's being said. So clarify that piece a little bit more.
Oh, I think that's absolutely true. And you could write for a lifetime on something that you really, really love, and it's simply not be marketable. It's there's nobody out there who wants your particular thing, and you should become self-published, and you should try to build an audience, see if there are other people out there who love what you do. But it certainly doesn't mean that what you're writing isn't competent or capable or engaging. Sometimes that does mean that, but it's a little bit like, I always use well, I will get to the idea of markets here in a second, but I always use the analogy of martial arts. You can basically practice in your basement forever, and that doesn't mean you can go fight a black belt. You have to engage in the physical confrontation with other people, and you have to get that physicality of what it's like to basically have balance and know how your strength matches another strength, and what can you personally do to prevail in basic martial arts kind of things. And writing is very much like that. You can't necessarily just write all by yourself and know whether you're good enough or doing good enough. So you have to write, but then you also have to submit, and you have to write, but it's also good to interact with other people who are learning. And you have to write, but it's also good to find a mentor or a writing coach or someone who can at least look at, and it doesn't always have to be paid or anything like that, but a teacher, someone who's willing to look at your stuff and say, these are the problems I have with it. Look, there's lots of free resources online, and there are tons of coaches out there, lots of them better than me. And you have to engage in that if you want to find out, where you're at in that level. Do you have your white belt yet? Did you get your yellow stripe on your belt? That sort of thing. Because there's a learning process. It's not just sitting down and having brilliance come out of your brain. It's basically learning to make some moves, and then learning what you did that didn't quite work, and then learning how you improve on that, and then deciding, oh, I see that I'm going to be really good at dialogue. That's really one of my strengths. So I'm gonna focus on that because it really is something that I can win if I do. That kind of thing. But in doing all that, in learning and in growing and in writing the million words you need to be able to advance toward professional level, just as you said, you have to pay attention to markets. It's not a question, as I alluded to earlier. You could send me an absolutely brilliant thing, which is some kind of mood philosophical piece, and it could be worthy of the New Yorker or something. And I'm going to look at it and say, this isn't DreamForge. This isn't what I'm doing. Mm-hmm. Or you could send me something that's very good, but it's just like the last thing I published, and I'm not going to do that. One that's kind of well known in our little industry, Clark's world. Neil Clark's not going to buy a zombie story. It's just not going to happen. As soon as he sees the word zombie or figures out that there's a zombie in it, it's not going to be in Clark's world. So every market has something like that, and you need to pay attention to what are they doing, what are they buying, and then you need to at least approach that. And sometimes I've had writers, when we've explained everything that we need to explain, and when they've read all the stuff, we return the story, and they came back to us with, I met all the marks. I've heard this phrase, but I met all your marks. And I would respond to that and say, yes, you did. You hit every single mark. And guess what? That was the opening ante into the game. It's like, you had to do that before we would even look at it. And once you did that, then we were able to evaluate it. And you just weren't as good as this other guy over here, or it wasn't one that we particularly wanted or whatever. But yes, hitting the marks is kind of like the entry fee. It's like, yes, we're glad you did that, but that doesn't mean I'm buying the story.
Right.
So you really have to pay attention to what the markets are, what the editor wants, that sort of thing. And we're living in a wonderful age. We're living in an age where you don't necessarily have to pay attention to the editor as the gatekeeper. It's like, of course I'm a gatekeeper. I founded the magazine, and I want it to go in a particular way. So naturally I'm going to be a gatekeeper, but you can go out there and start your own stuff. I had no publishing skills. I just basically learned it because I wanted to do it. And if you really want to do something, you can certainly get a website, you can get online, you can get on social media. You can start write little bits of stories on Twitter, find people who want to follow you and just make your way. I think today, even one of the ways you can get into traditional publishing is go out there and self-publish, find an audience. And if you go to a publisher with an audience, it's like, look, it's like, I have 1 million followers. I sold this many ebooks or whatever. It's like, do you want to see something from it? You're going to them with something that they would pay attention to.
I get it. Like with Writers of the Future, even I had a recent, this past weekend, had Jody Lynn and I did 2 Zoom events for New Year. Here's New Year, make it New Year's resolution of getting that story written. And one of the not big problems, sometimes she'll get great stories, but there's no speculative element in it. It's just a really good story. So she has to send, thank you very much. And it's just, we return it because it's not speculative fiction, which is another factor too, that people have to have.
Or the speculative element comes real late. We've seen that. Where it's a perfectly normal dramatic story, and it's page 20 before a speculative element is introduced. And that's part of that idea of structure. It's part of the basic things that we would teach to our Dreamcasters. It's basically, you can't do that.
Right. Oh yeah, this is science fiction. Okay, so here we go. Then the robot came into the room, Now, one thing too, which is which we've taken a definite stance on, which is AI created work, with now a new rule that's going in volume 40 that we reject anything that's AI created. Have you had any issues with that yet?
We have not had any issues for that yet, and I'm kind of sad because I want to see an AI written story. So, I have this conceit that I'm smart enough to be able to tell the difference, right? And I don't know if that's true unless I actually get to, see it. So I'm not encouraging people out there to submit AI written stories to DreamForge. But if there's someone out there who has experience with that and can say, hey, Scott, here's what we mean, I'd certainly like to see an AI written story. But, obviously we want to basically, we're here for creative humans. We're not here to pay machines, and we're not here to pay people to just push a button and generate a story. I do wonder, though, how this is, because again, that idea of, remember, I talked a little earlier about calculators came into the use, and my teacher said you can't use a calculator, but then everybody's using a calculator a couple of years later. Same thing with illustration and Photoshop. There's AI now that creates illustrations.
Yep.
But then there's also, Photoshop. And when Photoshop came into use, was that really art? Like, was the artist actually? So this argument has many tentacles and many shades and variations.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if there's some point 5 years, 10 years down the road, or sooner than that, where there's some element of AI generation or help that becomes acceptable. Again, certainly.
Well, right now there's a class action suit that just went against a few of the different companies using it. The main thing on it is that what they're doing with AI is that they're skimming the computers aren't creating anything. They're skimming existing content, and they're using that, so that they're going and saying it's plagiarism. They're taking their stuff to create something else. Same thing with art. I mean, we've got the Illustrators of the Future contest, so I've definitely seen a lot of artists, and I see what they do when they use Photoshop or any of those other types of programs. They're still creating. They're still doing the brushstrokes, whereas I've also gone in when I was told about the ecstasies of AI generated art. Here, try it. So I went and I gave the different commands, and I did a piece of art, quote unquote. I use that very loosely. And it's like, for what we see with Illustrators, the future and Rise of the Future, it's so wrong. Our purpose is to recognize and help nurture new talent. And so that's what that's all about. So I was just curious where you stand at with DreamForge.
Yeah, and I certainly understand it, because before DreamForge, one of the little steps before we got into DreamForge was we actually ran an art contest for science fiction, because we had some friends my wife's an artist. We have friends who are artists. One of the things that we should say with DreamForge is Jane Lindskold, who's a wonderful writer, and she has some novels out, Aurora Borealis Bridge, and I have one behind me, actually, David Weber and Jane Lindskold, A New Clan. But she's an instrumental part of DreamForge, and she helped us with our art contest as well back then. And the idea was to obviously reward illustrators who were doing cool things with art, and we had cash prizes. But we got an entry. Where I'm going with this is, we got an entry that we did recognize as basically, hey, this is you went and got art off of a stock art site, and then you put some figures on the foreground of it. And honestly, when our judges were looking at that, they liked the art in the background, not the stuff you put on the foreground. So it was basically somebody else's work attracted us to this as a possible winner. It wasn't what you did with it. So we're disqualifying that. And I think that's basically kind of the same idea. It's like, you're not going, we don't particularly want to be here paying you for not using talent, but basically taking someone else's work, nor do we want to be here paying you for basically pressing a button and an AI goes out and skims a bunch of other people's work and combines it. It's like, that's not what we're here for. But like anything else, how is this going to proceed over the next, years to generations?
Right.
It's not going to stay stable like it is now.
Right.
It's not like people came up with this idea and, we reject it, never going to be used. And they're going to shut it all down. It's like, it's going to continue to evolve in some way. I'm going to be fascinated to see it. In the meantime, no, I'm not buying an AI generated story or parts of it that are substantially AI generated or whatever. And I'm really curious to see someone try, because there's so much more than to writing a story effectively than having the AI do it. I just want to see what my reaction is when I'm faced with that. Not as far as whether I'll buy it or not, but am I smart enough to say, yeah, there's something screwy with this? It's like, where did this come from?
Okay, I was just curious on that, because we took a definite stance on that, and it turns out that that's the industry too definitely has issues with it as well, because people worked hard to create their stories or to create their art, and to have it someone other taken is, for somebody else to take credit for it is not okay. Anyway, moving on. One last area I wanted to discuss, because we're, as I knew it would be, this is going really fast.
Yep.
Yes. The importance of reading other stories to develop your own voice. Like one thing that was done, because L. Ron Hubbard was one of the masters of science fiction and fantasy, but also other storytelling, adventure, mystery, westerns, romance in the 30s and 40s. And when he started his competition in '83, that was a lot of what, you know, his contemporaries also had participated in, the first judges. And one of the things that was always been encouraged, that you got to read, you've got to read other stories. And a lot of them had actually read a lot of his stories, because he was, like I said, he had actually published over 200 stories in the 30s and 40s in multiple magazines using his own and 15 different pen names. But what's your take on the importance of aspiring writers to read? You know, you got to write, but also the importance of reading, and also reading you're reading your material. Like we tell people to read Writers of the Future to know what you need to, what do we look for, but to read your magazine too. And I'll say this for you, is to subscribe for your magazine and get it and read it, so you know, like, what is it that you're looking for. So how important do you see that?
Oh, you have to be a reader. I don't know how you can be a writer without being a reader. And my love is to read very, very broadly. So you do want to read in your genre. You obviously, if you're a hard science fiction fan, you want to read hard SF, and you want to understand what they're using and how they're doing it and how they build character and how they research what it is they do. If you're doing medieval fantasy, you want to read that. But it's also extremely valuable just to read anything else. Read Marco Polo, read Lao Tzu, read anything you can lay your hands on. All of it is basically fodder for building up the mind and coming to understanding and that sort of thing. You know, it's a little bit like I used that martial arts analogy earlier. When I was younger and in martial arts, we were doing taekwondo, but we would have wrestlers come in. We would have people come in from different disciplines. And it was basically, you need to learn, you need to experience, you need to have those things build up inside you so that you have all the knowledge you need to do the thing that you want to do. So when it comes to developing your voice and that's going to come kind of naturally. But having all that stuff in the background and continuing to read after, I'm sure that the most successful writers are still reading every day and finding things that they love and learning from it. So read the things you love, but don't get isolated there. Read a bunch of other things as well that maybe seem crazy and completely off what it is that you're doing, but you're going to benefit from all of it.
Okay, great. Thanks. I just wanted to address that last little point too, because they need to know what it is that they're submitting to when they when they want to be able to approach DreamForge, but also just to become your own voice, you need to look and see how other people do it, what they do, how they do this thing. Maybe you have to read a story twice. One is just as a fan, as enjoyment. But then again, okay, now how do they accomplish that? I really like this story. What did they do? What was their take on adding these characters or on building the suspense that really hooked me? And then study it as a writer to see what do they do. So anyway,
well, actually, one little writing exercise that I like to tell people is, go get your favorite book, something that's your favorite author, look at a chapter or whatever, and you rewrite it. It's like, read it, understand what's there, and then rewrite it. It's like, why are they better than you? It's like, you're going to see stuff, you're going to be able to figure stuff out. It's like what did they do that makes them sound so good and makes this so, and where did you fall short of that? And
right.
And again, that really engaging with it to try to understand it.
Well, that's great. Good. Well, we've gone through our hour, so I just want to end off with one last question of you. Like, again, how do people, first of all, sign up for and subscribe to DreamForge? And I guess that answers, yeah.
Yeah, you can learn everything you need to know by going to DreamForgeMagazine.com. So just go to DreamForgeMagazine.com. You can learn all about us. There will be links to subscribe, all that sort of stuff. But I do have a special for your listeners, John.
Please,
so
pray tell.
If you go to dreamforgemagazine.com and you do that / and after that you put WOTF, so very simple, dreamforgemagazine.com/WOTF, we have a special offer for your listeners of your podcast where you can either get a digital subscription or a print subscription. But for the first 50 subscribers on either side, print or digital, we're going to give stuff away. So you can, if you're a print subscriber and subscribe to print, you can get a free copy of the Worlds of Light and Darkness anthology that we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
And if you're subscribing to the digital side, first 50 people who do that, you can get a back issue of DreamForge. You can get a print so you can actually see what the print is all about. So we have that online for you.
That's at dreamforgemagazine.com/WOTF.
Yep, WOTF. Yep.
That's awesome.
That's pretty simple.
That's great.
And that's just for US, unfortunately, because of the mailing situation. It's really hard to mail things internationally. Anybody really wants to do international, just contact me. And you want to pay those fees. The best thing to do, actually, if you're international, most economical thing is just go on to Amazon. All of our stuff, our magazines are on Amazon. They're going to ship it to you locally from where they are. It'll save you a bundle.
Oh, good. And also, unless you want to go digital, in which case they can go straight to you.
Go digital. Yep.
Okay. Which that counts in that first 50 if you do the digital.
Yep.
Good, because we got listeners from over 110 countries. So I don't want to discount the fact there'll be people outside of mainland United States, North America here.
Oh, well, okay, we'll always make a deal. You just might have to do it by emailing me.
Okay, good.
Send it out through the contact form, and we'll figure out how to give you a discount.
That sounds great. Anyway, that's great. Thank you very much, Scott. And thank you for listening. Subscribe to the Writers of the Future podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We've also been syndicated on the United Public Radio Network, where you can find these podcasts as well. Writers of the Future series can be purchased wherever books are sold in the US, Canada, the UK, Australia, and South Africa, and available everywhere via Amazon.com. We are especially appreciative of our sponsor, Carnation, for supporting this podcast. Carnation has been making delicious milk products for over a century and is still going strong. Writers and Illustrators of the Future are contests created by L. Ron Hubbard to provide a means for the aspiring writer and artist to be seen and acknowledged. It is free to enter and open to amateur short story writers and artists of science fiction or fantasy. Again, thank you very much, Scott.
Thank you, John.